friends, and welcome to today's episode of Booked. I'm your host, Saffron Asteria, and I'm joined today by J.D. Barker. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm really well, thank you. It's always nice to do recorded interviews every so often, because then if I make a mistake, I can pretend like it didn't happen.
Yeah, I'm doing a live show. That's a whole other ask. I've got a weekly podcast that I've been doing for I think almost 3.5, 4 years now. We've got about 400 episodes. We haven't missed a week yet.
Yeah.
But we record it in advance. We've got somebody who goes back through and cleans everything up. They fix all my mistakes, make it sound like I know what I'm talking about.
What a dream.
I can't imagine doing it live.
It's because it's just me, and
Yeah.
I think having to edit recorded episodes every week got a bit old, because I did that for about a year, and then I started doing the live ones, and I was like, oh, I've got so much more time to do other stuff. But I do I went through a period of doing 3 to 4 shows a week. That was
Wow.
crazy. So I'm glad I wasn't having to edit them. But anyway, I'm glad you're here, and I'm excited to talk about your work and your writing journey. So first off, I'd like to talk about The First Scarlet Door. So this book is coming out on September 22nd this year. Is that right?
Yeah, September 22nd. It's a prequel to my 4MK trilogy, which has been out for, believe it or not, almost 10 years now. Um,
Really?
yeah,
Wow.
it's one of those books like it came out, and it did well, but it's sustained on word of mouth. Like we haven't
Mhm.
put any dollars behind it from an advertising standpoint in probably 8 or 9 years, like since the last title came out.
Wow.
But it's still hitting bestseller lists in different countries. Like I
Mhm.
looked right before we got on, it's like 1,000 something in the Amazon store. But it's been out for like that long, and it's all word of mouth. Like one person reads it, they tell 4 or 5 of their friends.
Mm.
It just got optioned again for the fourth time. Sylvester Stallone's company, Balboa Productions, picked it up, and they're working on turning it into a streaming series, which is
Congratulations.
thank you. And like it's option number four. So like it's
Mhm.
been like initially when we sold the book, CBS bought it, and they came to us and said, well, we're going to do a feature film for the first movie and a TV series for the other two books in the series.
Mhm.
That never happened, but they had it for a couple of years, and I went back out there, and Lionsgate picked it up, and somebody else picked it up. This is the first time where it actually feels like it's actually going to get to the screen.
Wow.
Because they've just got some great people behind it. They just brought in a woman named Channing Powell,
Mhm.
who was the showrunner on Walking Dead,
Oh, wow.
which is fantastic for me because the story itself, I basically tell two different stories at once. We've got a modern day police procedural, but then we flash back to the serial killer as a child. I basically tell his story from the time he's about 14 or 15 years old.
Mhm.
And I go back and forth through the books, and they want to film it that way. So, and then at some point, spin off the younger generation as a separate series.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of moving parts involved in something like that. And somebody like Channing Powell, who did it with Walking Dead and like all those different shows and was able to be puppet master on that, like she is
Mm.
perfect.
That's fantastic. It must feel so good to finally get to a point where you actually are going to see it on screen.
I've got 8 different projects in what I call various stages of Hollywood hell. And this has been going on since the very first book. Like almost everything I've written has been optioned, but like nothing has actually made it to the screen.
Mm.
So until I'm sitting there with my butt in a chair watching it, like I'm probably not going to believe it. I write a lot of books with James Patterson, and he wrote a book a
Mhm.
few years back with Bill Clinton called "The President Is Missing."
Mhm.
Showtime paid an enormous amount of money to option that. They started filming it. They got 4 episodes done, and then they pulled the plug. So
That's
like
bonkers.
you never know. I mean, there's a movie for I think it's Batgirl that they filmed,
Mhm.
feature film, that will never be released because the studio decided it's better for them to keep it as a tax write-off than to actually put it out in the wild and release it as a film. So, there's so many moving parts in something like this. Somebody once told me if you
Mhm.
watch the credits at the end of a movie, 5 or 6 minutes of names going by, every single person there had to be there in order for that show to make it to the screen. You
Mhm.
take one of them away and the whole, house of cards kind of falls apart. And that
Yeah.
is really what it feels like.
Yeah, it must be. I in the industry that you're in, especially with the level of success that you have, it still sounds like you have a lot of disappointment happening.
Oh
How do you
yeah.
manage that?
As an author, you are going to hear no more times than you will ever hear yes. I think you just develop a thick skin,
Yeah.
for it over time. I mean, it starts with the whole agenting process. You start querying people.
Mhm.
Most of them come back with a no. You might get a maybe, but like they set you up from that standpoint. And once you
Mm.
get an agent, then you've got to query publishers.
Yeah.
Here comes a bunch more no's. They're always friendly about it. Like we love this, we like this part, but it's just not a
Mhm.
fit for us because. So like I think I've been doing this for almost 11 years. I think 11 years in November.
Mhm.
So you just you get used to it over time.
Yeah.
It's Hollywood in general, though, is a roller coaster. To give you an example, I've got a book called A Caller's Game that I wrote a few years back.
Hmm.
And up until that point, everything had gotten options. So I got a little cocky. I'm like, I'm going to write a book that they can't film. So I blow up like half of New York in this book. I'm like, there's no way they can film this. Ridley Scott's company immediately optioned it. They're like, oh, yeah, we can film it. It just gets expensive.
Hmm.
And they had it for about a year and a half or so. And then I got a phone call one day from my agent, and he said, Jennifer Garner wants to do it. So we jump on a Zoom call. Jennifer Garner is fully on board. She's got what they call a first look deal with Netflix, which means now we've got a studio.
Hmm.
Netflix is offering up roughly about $100 million if we decide to make this. So now we've got
Hmm.
a budget. All these things play out in about 2 or 3 weeks. Then I
Wow.
get another phone call from my agent. Jennifer Garner is pulling out due to a scheduling conflict. All
Oh,
of a sudden, Jennifer Garner is gone, Netflix is gone, the money is gone, and we're right back to where we started from. And that is literally how every Hollywood project for me has been. Every time my agent calls, it's either really good news or really bad news. There's
yeah.
no in between with those guys.
That I don't know if my heart could take that. I think I would really
Well, that's
struggle.
that's that's the thing. I mean, you learn to take a step back from it, and
Yeah.
they could tell you the greatest thing in the world. Like when I got the phone call saying Sylvester Stallone's company wants to make your series,
Mm,
like it's exciting, but like at the same time, I have to dampen expectations,
yeah.
until I actually see it happen. And I just go back to what I actually know how to do, which is write the next book.
Yeah.
Like that, as the author, that's the only thing you really have control over. So I double down on that every time.
I mean, at least you had an outlet and you had something to keep going, and you know that your books are still going to sell and people still want to read the stories that you want to tell. So at least you've got something. It's not like they've taken the only thing away from you, I suppose.
Yeah, I've got a lot of friends that are screenwriters, and they
Mhm.
don't have that. They write a screenplay. If it doesn't go anywhere, it goes into a desk drawer somewhere, and it's forgotten. So at least as authors, you've got a viable product that you can take out into the world and launch in multiple different ways.
Mm. Do you think that because I've only just met you today, so I don't know who you were 10 plus years ago. In any way, has this industry, with all the rejection that it comes with, has it made you more skeptical as a person, or are you just more accepting of those things just not working out?
I worked behind my last real job. I was a chief compliance officer at a brokerage firm. So I
Yeah.
worked in finance. I hated that job, but I did it for a very long time.
Hmm.
And I would come home at night and I would work on these writing projects. I had a side gig as a book doctor and a ghostwriter.
Hmm.
I did that for 23 years. So I was basically working behind the scenes. So I heard a lot of these stories from people that I worked with, other authors, other agents, editors, stuff like that. I saw
Hmm.
it happening to other people. So I was kind of prepared for it. In a lot of ways, it opened my eyes, and I was able to not only be prepared for it before it actually started, but
Hmm.
I could come up with a plan and be ready for it, which I think was very helpful. Because if you come in, you come into this, you sell your first book, all of a sudden this happens, that happens. If it's the first time you're experiencing all that, I can
Hmm.
just imagine how crazy that is.
Yeah.
I've been lucky that I've got people in the industry. I can pick up the phone, I can call some of these guys, get their advice.
Yeah.
Um, the writing community is fantastic.
I agree. Yeah. It really is. It's something like I fell into the writing community about 2 years ago. I'm not very good with dates. Around 2 years ago. And obviously, like, you're going to get horrible people wherever you go. But for the majority, everyone's just so caring and we all want each other to succeed. And there's like this opinion that I've seen around that we're so sorry about my dog. She is off her anxiety
speaking of
medication and she's
speaking
having
of
trouble.
opinions,
It's mostly my dog. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, there are people who are of the opinion that we're all competitors, and to some degree, I agree with that because we're all fighting for attention and fighting for a reader to pick our book up as the next read. But we are also kind of on the same team because if we're all, I don't know, setting a standard and encouraging each other to develop and grow and improve, then it kind of does all of us a favor. I don't know. I've got mixed feelings about it.
no, I mean it's true. Like I got really lucky. Stephen King read my first book before it came out, and he let me use some of his characters in it.
That's amazing.
That was a huge leg up. But he did that because he's a nice guy.
Mhm.
He remembers what it was like to write Carrie, sitting in a trailer between a washer and dryer. He
Yeah.
remembers, what it was like for all these things to happen to him. And like he is perfectly willing to reach a hand back and help that next person.
Mhm.
And I've kind of run into that with everybody. I mean, even right, I'm on book 6 or 7, I think now with James Patterson,
Mm.
one of the biggest selling authors in the world. But he still completely remembers what it was like to grow up in a boarding house with no money at all.
Wow.
Like that is fresh on his mind.
Yeah.
So like every author you talk to, they remember their origin story. They remember, they've been in the same position you are. And if
Mm.
they can offer some little bit of advice to help you, get past a hurdle that they've already experienced, I've yet to run into one that's not willing to share that.
Mm. I'm glad that you've had that experience. I think a lot of people are, but I find that a lot of writers are very introverted and they treat the craft of writing as a very solitary activity, but you've collaborated with a number of people. Do you have like a preference? Do you like to be left alone sometimes?
It's a weird thing because, when I was working as a book doctor and ghostwriter, I did that for
Mm.
23 years. So, I spent more time working with other people than I actually have writing my own books.
Mm.
When I sat down to write my first solo title, it felt very strange not to have other people weighing in on that. So I think I do crave it to a certain extent.
Mm.
Like when Jim Patterson, when we sit down and we write a book together, like I know I can write a good book, he can write a good book, but you put the two of us together and we can write a really good book that neither of us could have done on our own.
Mm.
We're able to pull from our own individual experiences. We can bounce ideas off each other. To me, that's gold. I
Mm.
wrote a book called Heavier the Stones with a woman named Christine Daigle, who's in real life, she's a neuropsychologist. So she was able to bring that skill set into the writing room. And
Mm.
I could fake it. I can watch, a bunch of Netflix specials, go on Google, and I can, come up with enough stuff to make it sound authentic. But
Mhm.
when you have that real voice in there weighing in, like you just can't beat that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've had such an incredible career and background and all your experiences. When you were first starting out, you may not want to answer this question. It's okay if you don't. But do you ever find that like egos get in the way when you collaborate with people? Because I don't know that I could collaborate with somebody because I feel like my ego's too big.
I run into that with the people that don't necessarily deserve to have an ego. But like
Oh.
when I talk to James Patterson, there's no ego.
Yeah.
That this guy he's got nothing to prove. Like he
Mm.
enjoys the storytelling process, loves working with other people, and that's why he still does it.
Yeah.
And there's a certain level I think that people get to, and like that's the way they see it. I mean, I check my ego at the door when I work with other people too.
Yeah.
I think you have to. For me, it's more about just dividing and conquering. You
Hmm.
find a co-author, you figure out who's good at what, who's not good at something else.
Hmm.
And you kind of double down on those things. If you both kind of try to do the same thing at the same time, you'll end up tripping over each other.
Mm.
So it's important to establish those guidelines from the get-go.
Mm. Interesting. So, when you are writing a book solo, you've obviously got editors, proofreaders. I don't know how large your team is. How many people does a manuscript go through before you're happy that it's like finished, or does it vary from project to project?
No, I've stuck with the same formula from the very beginning. So
Mm.
when I come up with an idea for a book, I'll usually write like the first chapter. Then I share that with my wife, and she tells me whether it's worth pursuing or not.
Mm.
And she's learned over the years to be extremely honest and critical with that kind of thing.
Mhm.
When I first gave her Forsaken, my first novel, she read it, she gave it back to me. She's like, "Yeah, it's a really good book. Go for it." I was like,
Mm.
"That's not what I need. I need to know what's wrong. I need to know what I need to fix." And she's like, "Are you sure?" And I said, absolutely. And like she took the book and she disappeared for 3 more weeks. And then she came back and gave it back to me. And it was like all the pages are folded over. There's highlighter marks everywhere, notes all over the place. I took it back into my office and went through it and like, yeah, practically cried. Like she just destroyed the book. But at the same time, like that is what I needed to hear.
Mhm.
So in today's world, I write that first chapter. She weighs in. If it's a worthy idea, then I'll write the rest of the book. And I usually do that behind a closed door. I don't share it with anybody
Mhm.
until I get to the end of that process. Then I run it through a program called AutoCrit, which is a fantastic website. It helps you weed out basically typical writer problems. So if you have
Mm.
passive voice, if you're using a lot of adverbs, whatever it might be, you dump it in there. It underlines everything that's wrong, tells you why it's wrong. What I like about it is it doesn't actually fix it itself. It just
Mhm.
underlines it, tells you what you did wrong, and gives you guidance as to what you need to do to correct it. But
Interesting.
because of that, it teaches you to fix these things, and you
Mm.
learn over time to just not make those mistakes anymore. So I run the entire book through that. Then I get it back. I give it to my wife again. She reads it from cover to cover. I get all of her feedback. I take it back. I rewrite it again. Then I give it out to my beta readers. I've got 6 different ones that I use. And I
Mhm.
pick them all because of different things. None of them are writers. They're all readers.
Mhm.
One of them gave me a 1-star review on my very first book. And I reached out to her when I saw that hit Amazon. 'Cause back in the day, you could actually get their email address from the
Mhm.
Amazon review. And I contacted her and I said, listen, if you take your review down, I'll let you read my next book as long as you give me this kind of feedback.
Mhm.
So accomplished two things. She took the 1-star review down, and then she read my next book, and she's been reviewing them ever since.
Wow.
Another girl that works with me, she's autistic, and she's capable of remembering like some of the oddest things. So if I use a phrase on page 23, and I use those same 3 words together 400 pages later, she will flag it. She will remember it.
Wow.
So I picked everybody based on certain skill sets. I give them all printed copies of the book to review. I don't give them electronic because I've learned over time that I get better feedback if I give them paper copies and force them to write in it. I give everybody specific instructions. I tell them I want to know anytime they feel it's okay to close the book. Mark that page, and I don't care if it's because you have to make dinner, or you've got to pick up your kids from school. I just want to know where you thought it was okay to stop that story. I also make them highlight anything that they skim. If they find themselves skimming, I want you to highlight that passage. So I get all these copies back from my 6 beta readers. I lay them all on my desk, and I just start flipping through, looking for consistencies. If 2 people flag the same thing, then I usually try to address it. So that's draft, basically number 4 or 5 at that point. Go back through that again, clean it all up. Then it goes to my copy editor, who cleans up all my grammar and punctuation. So at this point, we're 5 or 6 drafts in, and that's when I actually share it with my agent or my editor. So the people on the professional side don't see it at all until I basically turn in what I feel is a perfect book.
Wow. That's truly interesting to me. As I said before, I interview a lot of indie authors who they either have been indie authors for a long time, or they'd like to be traditionally published. There's a large mix of people, and everybody goes through a very, very similar path. But I think one of the things that I think indie books fall flat on is because of funding. People aren't always necessarily able to go through multiple edits, or have people on a team, or anything that costs money, like covers and all that sort of stuff. I think it really is a shame that that stuff isn't more accessible, but you can so tell when something has been edited multiple times, or it's gone through multiple people, because it's not just that one person telling the story and hoping you get what they're trying to say.
I think you have to do it. Because at the end of the day, your book is competing. Last year, there were 4 million books that were published on Amazon. 600,000 of those were traditional. The rest were all indie titles, but your book is one. So somehow your book has to stand out. And I've learned over time, like, your book is not going to stand out unless it's a 5-star read. Like, that has to be a given. Walking through the door, before an agent sees it, before an editor sees it. It's going to make you more money if it's a 5-star read. Like, somehow you need to fine tune that. I mean, I put stuff on credit cards with that first book. I did whatever I had to do. I got really lucky with the second book. I ended up with a 7-figure deal with the feature film and the TV show and all that stuff attached to it. But I came out of the finance world, so like I was worried that I would never sell another book again. So rather than take that money and drop it into the checking account, my wife and I used that money to buy real estate. And then we use that real estate to basically create passive income. So to this day, I don't spend any of the dollars that come in on the writing side. That money comes in, it goes into a bucket, and it goes into something else that's going to create passive income, and we live off that passive income. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, but regardless of your personal financial situation, if you look at the overall book world, the world doesn't care. Like, your book has to be a certain level or it's going to get overlooked. So somehow you need to find a way to make that happen. It's unfortunate because what I see happen a lot is indie authors, they write a book, they query a bunch of agents, they get a bunch of rejection letters, then they just decide, well, I'm just going to go ahead and put it up on Amazon and see what happens. And the same thing always happens. That book comes out, their friends and family review it, they get 10 or 25-star reviews. Then the real readers find it and they start to review it for what it actually is. And that review starts to drop and drop and drop because it's got grammar problems, it's got punctuation, there might be pacing issues, maybe dialogue needs some help. But none of those problems have been weeded out. So before you know it, the book is sitting at 1.5 million in the Amazon store on the rank. It's not selling anymore. The average rating is 2.5, 3 stars, or whatever it might be. And then they turn around and they write their next book and throw it up on Amazon and hope for something different. They're not going to get something different, because then what ends up happening is a reader stumbles into that second book. They go and look at the author, they look at the reviews on the first book, and they don't even pull the trigger on the purchase anymore. If you try to query an agent, the first thing they're going to do is Google you. So they're going to see that book out there, and that's your track record. That's how the publishing world sees you. So you've got to keep all that stuff from happening. It sucks. I know it's very difficult. It's expensive. This at the end of the day, this is a business, and you have to compete, as if it's a business.
I totally agree with you. It's something that I've tried to recommend to people whenever I've been able to do so, is that you have to figure out what your goal is with your book. If it is just simply making the thing exist and having it available for people to read. If that's what your goal is, fantastic. Then you need to do the things to make that goal happen. If your goal is to have an income based on the sales of your book that's steady enough for you to live on, you have to play the game. Like, you have to make sure that it fulfills the criteria for the mainstream, because otherwise you're just going to disappear under a pile of other books that look similar or better than yours. But it's hard to say that, because I often see this argument of, well, that doesn't make it accessible to people for them to be able to do. But it's only been in the last like 10, even less than that, years, where people have been able to self-publish so cheaply, because you can technically self-publish a book for like very little money if you don't spend the money on all of the like standard things to make it look super professional. I don't know.
Well, take a step back and just think about that statement. Like, why should it be accessible?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you decided today that you wanted to build a car,
Yeah.
like the auto manufacturing world isn't going to make that process accessible to you just because you want to do it.
Yeah.
You're making a product. At the end of the day, you're making a widget that has to go out into the world and sustain a business or not sustain a business, if that's your goal. Like you said, there's plenty of people that write a book just for the sake of having a book out there. Perfectly happy with nobody reading it other than friends and family. That's great too. I wish a lot of people did that for like a memoir standpoint.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen as much as it should.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to be a professional writer, if you're trying to make a living at this, you have to treat it, as such.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I see a lot of people falling into the trap of I'm so sorry. Just like based on the covers, for example, not doing the research to choose a cover design that aligns with the type of book that you relate your book to, things like that, because that's the first thing that people are going to see. Like, when you look at many of your book covers, immediately I think, well, that's going to be a thriller, like, and yeah, I feel like there could be a lot more clear guidance, but I do think that finances just get in the way of people achieving that, I think.
Yeah, you can get decent book covers for little money. I mean, for me personally, like I'm 55 years old, so I remember going to the grocery store with my mom, standing in the checkout lane, and there being a rack of paperbacks on the side next to us. And the
Mm-hmm.
first thing I did is my hand always reached for the one with the coolest looking cover.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what else is on there, but like that's how the process works. And like it hasn't changed other than now we're clicking on a digital image and on some website somewhere, but we're
Yeah.
still clicking on that image first, and then we're learning what the book is about after.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's nothing more important than the book cover. But there are cheap ways to do it. I used to use a company called 99 Designs, which I loved. I
Mm-hmm.
think they're roughly about $300. You send your description of what your book is about and any ideas you may have for the cover. You post all that up there, and then artists bid on the opportunity to create your cover. So you'll get 10, 20, 30, 40 different covers from different artists, and then you pick the one that you actually want to go with, and then you fine tune it with that artist. But what I like about that process is, for me, like I am not very good at visual stuff. Like I need somebody else to create that. And when I start weighing in with ideas, I end up taking something that looks cool like that and turning it into complete garbage. So like I've learned to double down on what I'm good at, stay away from the stuff that I'm not.
Yeah.
But with 99 Designs, you get from that initial round maybe 10 or 20 decent covers. I used to take those and put them up on social media. Just if you were to buy a book based solely on its cover, which of these would you pick? Whichever one got the highest vote, that's the one that I worked with. And it's funny because now writing with James Patterson, like he uses focus groups. So they create a cover for his book. They put that cover in front of a focus group, and then that's how they decide what the title of the book is going to be, what the back of the blurb is going to be, what the cover is going to look like. But we've got social media. We've got the ability to, tap the biggest, focus group in the world if we want to. But I rarely see authors do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there is this like fear that if you put it out there, what if somebody steals it? I think that's a lot of what puts people off.
Nobody's going to steal it.
but they might. I think that's
but they might. I mean, sooner or later, it's going to be out there in the world. I mean, like my books have been published and they've been stolen. They're probably being stolen right now. They're on all the public pirate sites. They were used to train all the AI models. There's very little I can do about that other than write the next book. But at the end of the day, people know my name. They know my brand. So even if pirated copies are out there, that at the end of it's still an advertisement for me. Like my pirated book is still my name somewhere in front of somebody else. And somebody who buys pirated books, they're most likely not going to buy a legitimate book anyway. So it's not really your real audience.
Yeah, that's true. But maybe they'll watch the movie when it comes out. So
they might on their stolen Netflix account.
Yeah. So, when it comes to the creative process and going through a publisher, do you have to put the reins on very much? Do you write to the market? Do you like how much of your creativity do you have to compromise?
So I am terrible if you ask my agents or my editors when it comes to this kind of thing because
Okay.
working in the industry for so many years, I had a lot of friends that they wrote a book that hit really big.
Mm.
And before you knew it, they had to write that same book but different over and over again for the rest of their career.
Yeah.
That scared me half to death. I didn't want to have to do that. So I reached out to a guy named Dean Koontz who's been doing this for a
Mhm.
long time, and I told him like, how do I avoid this happening? He said, well, what you want to do is come up with a common thread for the type of story you want to tell and
Mm.
then make sure all of your books have that particular thread. So if you read my Wikipedia page, I think it outlines it best, but it says I'm a suspense author who may include elements of horror, sci-fi, this or that,
Mhm.
but suspense is my common thread. Then he told me to make sure I bounce around between genres from the very get-go.
Mhm.
So I did that. My first book was a horror novel. Then I wrote a thriller. Then I wrote a prequel for Dracula for Bram Stoker's family. So we're back into horror. Then I
Mhm.
wrote another thriller. And what we found is the readers, because of that common thread, will come along for the ride. They'll read those different genres because they're similar enough. They like the voice.
Mm.
They'll stick with you. So I think I got about 4 or 5 books in. I got a phone call from my editor, and he said, "Well, we just got some data back, and it looks like your audience is women 45 and over. So
Mhm.
that's who you want to target with the next book." So I went back and I wrote a young adult book because my general thinking was I've already got women 45 and over. I need to figure out how to get this group over here.
Mhm.
So that's how I've always approached this. I use the books almost like a literary Pied Piper. I
Mhm.
look for a market that's not currently reading me. I write something that's similar to my style, but close enough to that genre or style to rope people in and bring them into the fold.
Mhm.
And that's not something I invented. It's something that I learned after studying people like Stephen King and James Patterson and Nora Roberts and some of these big names that we see in the bookstores.
Mhm.
Like that, where their name is this big on the cover and the title is this big.
Mhm.
They are brand name authors, and that's how they got there.
Mm. Was that always your dream when you first started out, like writing to survive? Not survive. What's the word? Writing for a living.
I mean, I always wrote. My mom encouraged it, but she always added the caveat: writing's a great hobby, but you can't make a living at it. You have to get a real job. So that's how I ended up working in finance. But I kept
Mm.
going back to it because it was so fun. Working in finance, I saw a lot of companies. I worked for an investment banking firm.
Mhm.
So I saw companies that basically started as an idea scribbled on a napkin in a bar, and 3 or 4 years later, they're a public company. And I
Mhm.
saw that, entire thing, from start to finish play out. So I have approached the writing thing pretty much using that same model,
Mm.
treating it as if it's a business that I'm nurturing from startup all the way to a public company. So I'm always looking to outdo myself, and for better or worse, that cause that competitive edge is what keeps, I think, my ship rising a little bit in
Mhm.
the harbor with each title. I don't really get satisfied. Like, something big happens, I get excited about it for about 5 minutes, and then my brain is like, well, how do we top that?
Hmm.
I enjoy that competitive aspect of it. Not everybody does.
Yeah.
A lot of authors would be much happier just sitting behind a desk doing nothing but writing the next book, turning it in, writing the next book. But in today's world, you have to be able to put on a business hat, a marketing hat. You have to put on your author hat. And
Mhm.
you have to get out there and socialize. And like you pointed out at the beginning, we're all introverts. We don't want to do any of that stuff.
Mhm.
But to succeed, you got to do the hard things.
Yeah. Do you enjoy doing things like interviews and talking about your book, or would you really, like, if it came down to it, rather just be writing?
Stuff like this. No, I hate doing stuff like this.
I get
I,
I
I'm,
get
I'm
that.
kidding. No, I'm just kidding. I used to like I'm autistic as well. I've got a
Mhm.
form of autism called Asperger's syndrome.
Mhm.
And when I was diagnosed at 22, and when I was diagnosed, I sat down with the therapist that I was working with, and we made a list of things that I was really good at, and we made a list of things that I needed to work
Mhm.
on. Public speaking was very high on that list of things that I needed to work on. And I found that I could basically approach that in one of two ways. I could go back and hide in my office and ignore it, and then status quo,
Mhm.
or I could force myself into situations I didn't necessarily want to be in.
Mm.
But the more I do it, the easier that it gets. So the
Yeah.
more I get in front of a crowd, the easier it is to talk to people. The more podcasts I do, the easier that process gets.
Yeah.
I can see myself easily sliding back too, though. If I stop this for a couple of weeks and just did nothing but sit at my desk,
Mhm.
like the comfort of that, like it's like a siren song. Like it brings me back. So I'm constantly walking that tightrope.
Mm. It's hard, isn't it? I don't know if you find this, like, if I spend a majority of the day not talking and I'm just writing or, doing something solitary, the moment that I talk to somebody for the first time during that day, I think I've forgotten how to talk. I don't know how to do it anymore.
That happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
You're the first person I've spoken to today, like actually talk to, other than my wife.
Mhm.
So like I don't even know that my voice is going to work half the time when I open my mouth.
Oh, it's working.
Right, yeah, writing full time is a very weird thing. Like I don't know what
Yeah.
day of the week it is. Like my schedule is the same pretty much every day. I
Mhm.
couldn't tell you if it's a holiday or not. I tend to structure things in a particular way though. Like I write first thing in the morning.
Mhm.
I get to my desk around 7 o'clock. I turn off the internet because I don't want to get distracted by all that stuff. And I knock out 2 or 3 thousand words on whatever I'm currently working on.
Mhm.
Then I flip the switch for the internet. That's usually around 10:30 or 11. Let the whole business side of things kind of flood my inbox and start
Mhm.
dealing with agents and editors and all that fun stuff. And I spend my afternoons talking to people like you. And I do that every day. I do at
Mhm.
least 5 days a week. So because I do it so often, it just gets easier and easier.
Yeah.
But if I go on vacation or something and take a break from it, like I was just in Spain on a book tour, I did get a chance to write while I was there. I wasn't, it's a very different type of talking in front of people.
Mhm.
So I came back and like, you have to almost do a reset and bring everything back to the norm again. It's a constant battle. I don't know anybody that's just always good at it.
Yeah. And it also must depend on, like, your mood as well. Like, do you ever feel like what you're producing isn't any good, so you have to just write it off for the day, or do you just push through it anyway?
Yeah, imposter syndrome. So yeah, that's how like everybody I know has that, including guys like Patterson, Stephen
Mhm.
King, Dean Koontz, like all these big name authors that I've talked to. They all feel that, and it doesn't go away. Like I'm
Yeah.
working on a book right now, and like I couldn't tell you if it's complete garbage or if it's really good. Like other people are reading it, they're telling me that's one of the best things I've written.
Mhm.
But for me personally, I think I'm so close to it. Like during that writing process, it's very difficult to tell. I do find that part of my process is I put the books because they're in other people's hands. I tend to step away from them sometimes for a month or two at a time, and then
Mhm.
I get them back, and I'm able to look at it more as a reader instead of the person who wrote it.
Mm.
And like that's when I realize that I actually know what I'm doing.
Mm.
Like you can see behind me like all my foreign editions for all my different books. Like sometimes I'll just grab one of those off the shelf and just read it. Like, oh yeah, I do know how to do this, and put it back. Just it kind of reassures you a little bit.
Yeah. Well, they're like trophies, aren't they? You've managed to achieve the thing. Like, you've put in hundreds and hundreds of hours of work, blood, sweat, and tears, and probably emotional turmoil, because it is a deeply personal thing to write something and let other people read it, regardless
Yeah.
of how long you've been doing it. It must still feel very vulnerable.
Yeah, that never goes away.
Yeah.
I think I'm 20 books in now. Like I have to literally go to Wikipedia and count them to figure out what I've got. But I think I'm on book 20 at this point. And
Cool.
those kind of things just never leave you.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know. The whole concept of letting people read your work has always been terrifying to me. And it's something that I've recently been experiencing. And it just is thrilling and terrifying and vaguely upsetting, but also like really fun. And you get to let people into your brain. And sometimes that's not always like a good thing. I suppose it
Well,
depends on the project.
I don't know about you, but like when I'm
Mhm.
writing a book, when everything's firing on all cylinders, to
Mhm.
me it feels like I'm watching a movie play out in my head, and I'm just
Mhm.
writing down what the characters do as fast as possible. So
Mhm.
it doesn't really feel like it's coming from me. It feels like I'm witnessing something and I'm just documenting it. So I think
Fascinating.
because of that, it doesn't hit quite as hard. Like I don't feel,
Mhm.
it's not like I just wrote a paper and I'm standing in front of the English class reading it to everybody.
Mhm.
This it just feels like, I saw this story. This is how it played out. Check it out.
Mm.
It feels different to me.
Interesting. So, in sort of going along the same lines, a lot of times when I speak to authors, and again, largely indie authors, there's a lot of self-inserting. So they'll base it on their own experiences, or they'll put themselves into each of the characters. Do you ever do that, or do you have that distance from your characters?
Yeah, I'm able to step back. I mean, part of the things that I did when I was working as a book doctor and ghostwriter, I wrote a ton of memoirs for other people.
Oh.
So I would sit down with like a female politician and I would interview her for like maybe a full weekend or 4 or 5 days straight, just get all
Mhm.
these stories out of her. Then I would have to go back home and I would have to write that as a book in first person from her point of view. So I
Mm.
was literally in that character. I see it as a character, that person's head.
Mhm.
And I had to convince the reader that I was that person, that I wasn't me
Mm.
because it was a ghost written project. And I think I did so many of those. I see characters as completely different people.
Mhm.
I developed them all, very extensively before I actually start writing any particular book. Like my lead detective in my 4MK series, his name is Sam Porter. And like I could take him to Disney World and drop him at the entrance, and I know what ride he's going to go on first. I know what he's going to eat for lunch. I know the name of his girlfriend in high school. I know his favorite song. Like none of these things will ever make it into a book, but like I needed him to be that well rounded before I could actually start writing anything.
Mm.
When I'm talking to other writers, I'll tell them you should be able to take 4 or 5 of your characters, sit them down in a room, and ask them the same question, and you should get 4 or 5 different answers. If everybody's giving you the same answer back, those characters aren't developed well enough yet. They need to be real people before you actually start writing that book.
Yeah. Yeah, I with the authors that I've spoken to in the past, there is a real mix of like just dumping out whatever the story is on the page, and some people will have like actual character sheets and they'll have like drawings or art made of the characters so that they can really get into their head. And it's all fascinating to me because everybody approaches it totally differently.
That's one of the things I really like about the whole writer thing. I mean, I've got a weekly podcast called Writers Inc., and we've interviewed every author out there, some of them a couple of times, and everyone's got a different origin story, and everyone's got a completely different process. Like I don't think we've had 2 people that have basically done the same thing yet. And I love learning from that and pulling from that. If I hear something that I haven't tried, I'll usually try it in my own work just to see how it's going to go. But it's really interesting to hear how other people do it. One of the things I used to tell people all the time is if I had to create characters really quickly, I would sometimes pick an actor or an actress as the basis. So I would say, okay, this guy is going to be like Ben Affleck because I know what Ben Affleck looks like, I know what he sounds like, I know how he moves, I know how he speaks, and I'll start writing the book with the lead man as Ben Affleck. And then I usually get about a third of the way through the process, and all of a sudden that character kind of takes on a personality of their own. They start to become their own person. By the time I finish the book, they're a completely separate character, nothing like Ben Affleck. And then I'll just go back through the book on my next draft, and I rewrite the first half to match up what I did in the second half. So I've got a fully fleshed out character. So that's a quick and dirty way to do it. It helps the base characters, I think, on real people if you're not capable of creating somebody from scratch. I think you got to start somewhere. But at the same time, I do tell a lot of authors, like if I don't feel like their work is personal enough, I'll often tell them to write the story in first person, from their point of view, because it's very difficult not to write a personal story when you're writing in first person. And you can always go back through the draft later and change it to third person if that's what you want to do. But by starting in first person, you create a solid narrative.
Yeah. I much prefer first person because I feel like I'm then putting on like a suit of the person who I'm writing about, and it makes it like way easier.
It does, but it's a very difficult thing for some people to do. Like I'm reading the new Carolyn Kepnes book right now. It's called You First. So she's entirely in Joel Goldberg's head, but she is doing it so perfectly, so effortlessly. Like it feels like she's a guy. Like it's very, for a woman to write a guy's point of view as well as she's doing it like that, that is a skill set that I wish I had. Like mine is not developed even to that level.
Yeah. I suppose it just depends on who you are as a person. I think sometimes it is difficult for people to think in a way that is empathetic to a person that's totally different to them. And I think it's super important to recognize that when you don't have like the skill set to represent that type of person very well, because it kind of takes the reader out of the moment and the story, I think.
Yeah, if something doesn't land right, it pulls the reader out every single time. And it can be something simple. A lot of times when a man tries to write a woman POV, it doesn't come across. Vice versa, and it's because we actually have different ways of speaking. Like the vocabulary that we use is different, and like you have to understand that. There's websites out there where you can drop your text in there and say, was this written by a man or a woman? And it's able to tell you. I imagine you could probably do that with like Claude and ChatGPT and stuff at this point. But it'll not only tell you, but like it'll tell you what you're doing differently. And like I think you have to do that. You have to study it. And you have to understand it if you're going to try and go into someplace that you're not normally able to do. Like if you're in somebody else's head.
Oh, absolutely. So I realized that we've kind of skipped over the first Scarlet Door, and I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions about it, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I will admit, this is the first book of yours that I've read. Now, I've seen your books around. I just have a TBR that's so long that if it was physical and it fell over, it would kill me. But I really, really enjoyed it. I read it in like 2 days because I love a thriller. And this is, I promise it's a compliment, I'm absolutely going to recommend it to my grandma because she's a thriller queen. She loves it. So I noticed that your chapters are all really short. And I wondered if that was something that you did with most of your work and why you make that choice.
I've always written short chapters, but working with James Patterson, like he's explained to me why chapters should be short,
Mhm.
and I think that's really stuck with me.
Okay.
But when you're writing a thriller, particularly something fast paced, you just want that reader to constantly turn pages, and you do want to give them spots where they can close the book if they have to. And
Mhm.
I think when I write short chapters, like I can write a 500-page book, but if it's short chapters, people still feel like they fly through it.
Mm.
It's a
Yeah.
psychological thing. For me personally, like I don't really like long chapters. I'm reading an Anne Rice book right now. I love Anne Rice. She's one of the best writers that ever, write, to write. But
Mhm.
our chapters are 20, 30 pages long sometimes.
Yeah.
And like I'm reading it at night. I'm looking at the clock. It's 11:30. It's 12:30. Like I need to get to sleep at some point. And like I'm looking for a place where I can close this. And there just isn't one. So I don't know. I've always liked short chapters.
Yeah. I enjoyed it, and you're so right. It does make you feel like you're getting through the book really quickly, and I did get through the book really quickly because what I do is I'll check the time and think, "Nah, it's okay, I can keep reading." And I'll look at the page number and think, "How did I read 60 pages? This is crazy." But yeah, I felt like the structure was really interesting, and because I hadn't read any of the 4MK series, which I will be now, previously, it was still nice to read this book, and I had the sense that I sort of was getting a lot of background information on the characters that I'll be reading about later in the series. So, what made you decide to write a prequel?
Well, when I wrote the original ones, I mentioned this earlier. I'm
Mhm.
telling two different stories at the same time. We've got modern day, and then I flash back. At the beginning of the Fourth Monkey, I wanted to write a serial killer novel that was different from all the other ones out there. So
Mhm.
my serial killer dies in the opening chapters of the book.
Mhm.
He's been operating in Chicago for about 5 years. Everybody knows who he is. They know his MO. He kidnaps a victim. He cuts off her ear. He mails it to her family in a little white box tied with a black string. So
Mhm.
at the beginning of Fourth Monkey, I've got a guy crossing the street to a mailbox with a little white box tied with a black string. He gets hit by a city bus and killed. So the police know that their killer is dead, but they also know that he's got a victim out there somewhere, and they have no idea who he is or who the victim is,
Mhm.
which creates that ticking clock that you need when you're writing a thriller. But I, had to come up with a way to keep my killer involved in the story, even though he was dead. So in order to do that from a writer standpoint, I created these diary entries, which the police find, and we flash back. So we'll have a
Mhm.
modern day chapter, then we flash back to a diary entries and back and forth. But I carried that through the entire trilogy. So at the end of the last book, which is called The Sixth Wicked Child, we basically leave our serial killer and he's 15 years old.
Mhm.
But the beginning of Fourth Monkey, he's 30 years old. So I've got 15 years there that I never really accounted for. I was perfectly fine with that. But these books have been out for about 10 years. I'm constantly going around the world promoting them.
Mhm.
And fans are all they throw them in front of me. They're like, I need to know what happened in like those 15 years.
Mhm.
So when COVID hit, I sat down and I wrote the three prequels. I didn't tell anybody I was doing it. I didn't tell my agents. My wife was the only person that knew,
Mhm.
mainly because I wasn't sure if I'd be able to pull it off. But I wanted to go back to that moment where he's 15 years old, where I basically left him and fill in that blank. And it was a very tricky thing to do because I had to.
Mhm.
The original novels are very twisty. There's a lot going on there, and I knew I had to take that whole story and kind of flip it on its head again. But I had to do it in a way that works with two different reading orders because a lot of people are going to read these, book 4, 5, and 6. They're reading them first because that's what's
Mhm.
currently out, and now they're going back to the prequel, so they're reading 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. Somebody like you is coming into it fresh, so you may read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Mhm.
So the story has to work in either of those, variations. It has to work in a way that that sits right. So I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to pull it off. I think I did.
Mhm.
We'll find out when the books come out.
Yeah.
But I didn't share them with anybody until I got the three prequels done. And it was
Mhm.
kind of refreshing because like I was working on the third book and I came up with an idea that I needed to put into the first book, and like I was able to do that because they hadn't been published yet. When the original trilogy was out there, like they came out, and like I couldn't go back and change something that was already published.
Mhm.
So this gave me a lot of freedom that I didn't have before. So I enjoyed it.
That's cool. I'm glad that you had that ability to do it, and I think that's something that a lot of people could take into consideration is when you're not sure that something is going to work out to not tell anyone in case it doesn't. Because I always get disappointed when I think something's going to happen that it doesn't.
Yeah, but if you write, because I'm doing this full time, I'm doing 2 to 3,000 words a day.
Yeah.
That's a decent amount. So I could put out, if I wanted to, 4 or 5 books of my own every year with
Yeah.
that kind of word count. But I'm only publishing 2 or 3 books a year under my own name. That I've got some co-author titles and other stuff happening. But
Mhm.
what that means is you end up with these books that just aren't out yet. You
Mhm.
start building up a pipeline that's bigger than your actual release schedule.
Mhm.
But I like that because I could start a book if something happens or I get stuck. I can put it aside and go work on something else. I can come back to that one when I figure that out.
Yeah.
I'm able to write tighter books because I have that freedom.
Mm. That's cool. Awesome. Well, this time has gone by incredibly quickly, as it always seems to. I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you before we leave, if that's okay.
Sure.
So, my first, or second to last question, really, is what does success look like to you?
Ooh, honestly, it's being able to spend time with my wife and daughter. Like I work from home. My wife works from home. I've gotten my daughter's 8 years old, going on 9, and I've been there every single day. I haven't missed a single thing.
Mm.
My father was gone. Like he was out the door at 6 in the morning. He got home late at night. I barely knew the guy,
Mhm.
and I just didn't want to be that as a person.
Yeah.
One of the things that my wife and I did at the very beginning of all this, I came out of finance. I had a very strong salary. We had a lifestyle that was basically based on that salary.
Yeah.
In order to become a full-time writer, we sold everything that we owned. And we
Mm.
bought this tiny little duplex in Pittsburgh and rented out one side to some tenants and moved into the other side. But what that means is we got rid of all these material things because we just didn't have room for them. And
Mhm.
I quickly realized I didn't need any of them.
Yeah.
Like all that stuff, like it really didn't matter. Like just being able to spend time with my wife and daughter are the only two things that really matter to me. So as long as I can continue doing this, like that to me is success.
Oh, that's really nice. So my final question is, if you could go back in time to when you first started writing and give yourself any advice, what advice would you give?
Ooh, so I've seen Terminator, so I know what happens when you start messing with timelines. Um, the truth of it, like I wrote my first book at 43 years old.
Yeah.
I could have easily started writing books in my 20s, when I was doing the book doctor ghostwriter thing.
Mhm.
But I don't think that I really knew what I was doing yet. Like I needed
Yeah.
those 20 some years, that learning curve, to really figure out how to write a good book. So even though I've stumbled, I've had things that have worked out, I've had things, times where I've fallen on my face. I don't think I would change any of it.
Mm.
So I don't think I would tell myself anything other than just enjoy the ride.
Yeah. That's good. I had an answer from somebody the other day that was, don't edit while drunk. That was their advice to themselves, and I think that's probably also quite good
I don't
advice.
know, worked well for Hemingway.
But thank you so much for your time today. It's been really lovely to get to know you, and thank you for sharing your journey with me. And I'm really hoping that people will go check out your new release in September.
You as well. I enjoyed this a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much.